Deep in the Vietnam jungle, a soldier vanishes without a trace during a chaotic enemy attack. Hours turn to days, hope fades, and then, a faint signal. A dog won't stop barking at something buried in the leaves. Could it be him, or something far worse? The jungle stretched for miles in every direction, thick with vines, shadows, and the kind of silence that never felt peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that made even the insects hesitate. The small American outpost sat tucked in a clearing, surrounded by towering trees and underbrush so dense it felt like the forest was closing in on them. Makeshift tents formed a half-circle around a muddy center, where soldiers gathered during the day to share coffee and news from home. But now, the only sounds were distant thunder and the steady buzz of the jungle. It was late, and most of the unit had turned in for the night. A few kept watch, eyes scanning the tree line, their boots damp from the evening rain. The air was heavy and still, like it was holding its breath. Then, without warning, everything exploded into chaos. By sunrise, the camp looked like it had aged years overnight. A few tents were torn, supplies had been scattered in the mud. Everyone looked exhausted, their eyes searching for what or who was missing. That's when someone called out, "Where's Latner?" Private Jack Latner, the youngest in the unit, was nowhere to be found. His tent was empty. His gear was still there untouched. No one had seen him during the raid. The realization settled like a stone in the chest of every man present. Captain Raymond Holt stood at the center of the camp, his jaw tight. He was an older officer, steady and respected. His eyes scanned the clearing again and again, as if Jack might suddenly walk out of the tree line, grinning like it had all been a misunderstanding. But Jack didn't return. He didn't run, someone said quietly. That kid wouldn't run. Captain Holt didn't answer. He didn't have to. He knew Jack had been taken. It didn't happen often, not here, not like this, and when it did, it never ended well. "We don't have long," Holt said, finally turning to his second-in-command. "If he's alive, they won't keep him that way for long." He walked toward the edge of camp and motioned for someone to bring the tracker. There was only one person who had a real chance of following a trail through terrain like this. Sergeant Will Reyes arrived minutes later, dressed in worn fatigues, mud on his boots, and sharp focus in his eyes. Beside him trotted a lean German shepherd with alert ears and steady steps. Ranger, his canine partner, had been in-country nearly as long as Reyes had, and his reputation traveled ahead of him. He was the kind of dog that could track a trail through pouring rain, over tangled vines, even across streams where scent vanished for ordinary noses. "Got something?" Reyes muttered, his voice low but calm. "It's fresh." Holt nodded. "How far do you think they could have gone? In this mud? Not far, but they're smart. They'll twist the trail, double back, hide every step. We can't lose time." Reyes stood, eyes locked on Ranger, who was already moving toward the forest. "Then we'd better get going." Reyes gave a single nod. "We'll find him." As the team disappeared into the forest following Ranger's lead, the camp fell into a strange stillness. The jungle, once again, seemed to hold its breath. No one said it out loud, but they all knew the truth. If they didn't reach Jack soon, the odds of bringing him back alive would shrink with every passing hour. The enemy didn't leave trails unless they wanted to, and if Jack was still breathing, it meant the enemy had a reason for keeping him that way. Whatever the reason was, it wasn't good. Deep in the jungle, with only a loyal dog and a determined tracker leading the way, the mission to find Jack Latner had begun. What none of them could know yet was how twisted the trail would become, and how one soldier's disappearance would uncover something far more dangerous than they had expected. Before the thick jungles of Vietnam became his battleground, Ranger had been just another pup in a small town outside of Cheyenne, Wyoming. He wasn't the biggest in his litter, nor the strongest, but there was something different about him. He watched everything, never just playing like the others, always observing, studying. When a trainer from a military dog program visited the town, it didn't take long for him to spot the potential. Ranger was chosen, not for his strength, but for his focus. Training wasn't easy. Ranger had to learn to follow scent trails across rivers, through windstorms, even in crowded streets where distractions were everywhere. While most dogs relied on commands, Ranger had something more. He could anticipate. He would stop, ears twitching, then change direction without being told. More than once trainers questioned whether he was following instinct or thought. In time they stopped asking and just trusted him. It was during advanced training that Sergeant Will Reyes was assigned to Ranger. Reyes had already handled a few dogs before, each one loyal in their own way, but none quite like this. Ranger didn't just follow orders, he read people, their moods, their fears. He'd tilt his head when Reyes was worried, and stay close when silence felt heavy. Their bond didn't form overnight. At first, Reyes kept his distance, treating Ranger like another tool in the field. But one rainy afternoon during a training exercise, that changed. Reyes had taken a wrong path through a deep canyon and slipped on a ledge. His call for help was lost in the storm. He thought no one had seen him fall, until Ranger appeared, panting and soaked, nudging him gently before sitting down beside him. Waiting, not barking, not running, just waiting. That was the moment Reyes knew this dog wasn't just trained, he was a partner. By the time they landed in Vietnam, the two moved as one. Reyes spoke in half words, and Ranger understood. He could sense tension before it arrived and often caught dangers before anyone else. In the field, Ranger was known not just as a tracker, but as a quiet protector. His sharp instincts had saved more than one life during jungle patrols. Now back at the edge of that same dense jungle, Ranger was crouched beside Jack Latner's tent, nose low, body tense, the piece of fabric Reyes had given him. Jack's sleeping cloth was clutched in his jaw, only for a moment before he dropped it and started pacing in tight circles, sniffing the ground. His tail didn't wag, his ears twitched forward, his whole body shifted into a different gear. Reyes watched closely. "He's on to something," he said, crouching beside him. But there was something else, something different in Ranger's reaction this time. It wasn't just the scent, it was the urgency. Ranger gave a low whine, then barked softly once and headed straight toward the trees without looking back. Reyes stood. He knows it's serious. The search team was already gathered, 5 soldiers, carefully chosen for their silence, their steadiness. Each one carried enough supplies to last a few days but traveled light enough to move fast. Reyes led them, Ranger at the front, his nose always just above the dirt, occasionally lifting to catch the wind. As they stepped into the jungle, the green closed in around them. Vines reached down from trees like fingers, and damp leaves clung to every step. The path Ranger followed wasn't one the enemy would expect anyone to find. It twisted sharply, ducked beneath logs, crossed shallow streams, and then disappeared into patches of thick ferns. They moved in silence, stopping only when Ranger paused to recheck the scent. Reyes rarely spoke, but when he did, it was soft and direct. "He's leading, not guessing," he told the team. Whoever took Jack didn't just run. They planned this. The deeper they went, the quieter the jungle seemed to become. Even the birds stayed out of their way. At one point, Ranger stopped suddenly near a patch of fallen leaves, sniffed, then stepped back. Reyes stepped forward, studying the spot carefully. The ground looked normal, but something about the leaves didn't sit right. Reyes motioned the team around it. "Trap," he said quietly. Ranger had sensed it before any of them had seen it. He looked up at Reyes, and then kept going. By midday, sweat had soaked through every shirt. The jungle wasn't just a place, it was a force pressing down on them, testing their patience and strength. But no one complained. Not with Ranger leading, not with the thought of Jack somewhere ahead. Maybe alone, maybe scared. Every time the trail twisted, Reyes thought about Jack's last moments at the outpost. How quickly everything had fallen apart. He remembered Jack's quiet voice, his photos pinned near his cot, the way he always asked questions no one else bothered with. Reyes didn't know him well, but that didn't matter now. They had a job to bring one of their own home, and Ranger more than anyone seemed to understand what was at stake. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the trail, Ranger slowed. He paused near a cluster of broken branches, sniffed deeply, then looked back at Reyes, and let out a soft, low growl. Not anger, not fear, just warning. Something had changed. Reyes tightened his grip on his pack strap and looked ahead. "Stay sharp," he said to the team. "We're getting close." None of them could have known it yet, but ahead of them, hidden deep in the folds of the jungle, was more than just a missing soldier. The trail they followed would soon reveal secrets none of them were prepared for. Ranger had sensed it, and now, they were walking straight toward it. The jungle swallowed sound like a heavy blanket. Every step was muffled by layers of moss and wet leaves. The air was thick, sticky with moisture, and the sun barely touched the ground beneath the dense canopy. It was a world of shadows and whispers, where nothing stood still for long. Not the branches, not the vines, not even the ground beneath their feet. Every movement stirred something. Every breath came with the thought that they were being watched. Sergeant Will Reyes led the small group through the undergrowth, his eyes fixed on the path Ranger carved ahead of them. The dog moved like a spirit, nose close to the earth, tail low, ears alert. Every few paces, he stopped, sniffed, and adjusted direction. The trail was still there. Jack Latner had passed through this place. Ranger could feel it. Behind Reyes, the others followed in quiet concentration. Private Hale, young but sharp-eyed. Corporal Lewis, tall and silent, his steps almost soundless. Two more, Anderson and Graves, brought up the rear, watching for signs that someone or something might be following them. The silence was both comfort and threat. It meant no one had stumbled into danger, but it also meant danger was waiting. Around them the jungle shifted. Trees stood tall, with tangled roots that reached across the ground like searching hands. Vines looped down from branches and wrapped around trunks, some thick as rope. Insects buzzed and clicked unseen. Somewhere deeper in the trees, a bird gave a strange hollow call, before going silent again. Reyes wiped the sweat from his forehead and whispered, "How far could they have taken him on foot?" No one answered, but Ranger did. He paused suddenly, muscles tensed. His nose hovered just above the soil near a clump of ferns. Then, without warning, he took 3 steps back and barked sharp. Reyes held out a hand. "Stop." The team froze. Reyes stepped carefully around Ranger and knelt. There, half covered by damp leaves, was a circular patch of disturbed earth. It didn't look like much, just slightly looser soil, but to trained eyes it was a warning. He gently brushed the surface away with a stick. Underneath was a pit lined with sharpened wooden stakes, hidden so precisely it was nearly invisible. Reyes let out a breath. That could have been the end of the trail. Or the end of us, Lewis murmured. Reyes looked at Ranger, who stood watching with calm eyes. "You just saved the mission, buddy." Ranger didn't move, didn't wag his tail. He simply turned back to the trail and waited. They kept moving, slower now. Every few yards brought a new tension. Were they walking toward a trap or away from one? And how many more waited? The jungle didn't offer answers. It only gave clues, and not all of them were helpful. Soon, they came upon the first real sign that they weren't just following a retreating enemy, but one that knew how to hide. In a patch of soft earth near a shallow creek they found footprints. Ranger sniffed and followed the edge, circling back, nose twitching. Hale pointed to the prints. "They're going the wrong way." Reyes narrowed his eyes. The boots, clearly American, were pointed in the opposite direction, away from where Ranger had been leading. But Ranger wasn't confused. He sniffed the prints, then looked up at Reyes with a low growl. "It's a trick," Reyes said. "They turned the boots around." Lewis nodded. "To make us think they went back." It wasn't just the footprints. As they moved deeper into the green abyss, other signs appeared. Branches were broken at shoulder height, not low to the ground, like most movement in the jungle. Scrapes on tree trunks ran in strange directions, almost staged. There was a pattern, but it was designed to confuse. Whoever was out there had done this before. They were dealing with someone experienced, someone who wanted to be followed, but only on their terms. Ranger grew more alert, sniffing not just the ground, but the air. At times he froze mid-step, nose lifted high. The wind was carrying something, maybe scent, maybe sound, but only Ranger seemed to understand it. The deeper they went, the more anxious he became. He started pacing wider circles around the group, ears back, low whines rising from his throat. Not out of fear but from unease. The trail was still there, but it was changing. At one point, Ranger stopped near a patch of bamboo. He barked once and pawed at the ground, then looked up, eyes locked with Reyes. Reyes knelt again and found something odd. An empty canteen, buried under leaves. American. A name scratched into the side, J. Latner. Reyes passed it to Hale. "Jack was here." "But why leave this?" Anderson asked. "Feels planted." "It's meant to keep us moving," Reyes said. "They want us to know he's still alive, or make us think he is." Ranger barked again, this time more urgent. He pulled away from the group, heading toward a dense patch of trees tangled with vines. Reyes followed, motioning the others to stay close. Ranger pushed through the thick growth and stopped at the base of a tree, pawing the ground. There, very shallowly, was another object, this time a strip of cloth, faded and torn, but clearly from an American uniform. Reyes held it up. A button was still attached. "He's close," Reyes whispered. "Too close." The others stood in a circle now, glancing at the trees around them. It felt like the jungle was tightening. The trail was no longer just a path, it was a warning. Someone was watching. Ranger's low growl confirmed it. Suddenly, Ranger turned sharply and sprinted a few feet to the left, barking furiously. His paws scraped at the soil near a fallen tree, then stopped. He sniffed once, let out a huff of air, and backed away slowly, head down. Reyes reached the spot and crouched beside it. The soil had been disturbed again, only this time it wasn't a trap. It was a message. Pressed into the mud, barely noticeable were handprints, small ones. Drag marks followed, heading deeper into the jungle. Reyes looked at the team. Jack's alive. He's trying to fight back. But they're still ahead of us, Lewis said. And they know we're coming. Reyes nodded. That's what worries me. The trail ahead twisted sharply and disappeared into thicker brush. The scent was fresher now. Ranger moved faster but with caution. Whatever was ahead, it was recent. The jungle no longer felt like nature. It felt like a maze, designed, controlled. The temperature dropped slightly as they moved into a shaded gully, and Ranger paused once again, this time not barking, just staring into the dark. Reyes crouched beside him, resting a hand on his back. What do you see? Ranger didn't move. He just stared, watching, waiting. Behind them, the others shifted uneasily. Anderson wiped his forehead. Feels like we're walking into something. We are, Reyes said, but it's not over, not yet. As they pressed forward, the jungle closed tighter and Ranger's tail dropped lower. The trail was close. Jack had passed through here not long ago, but now something had changed. The hunter was becoming the hunted, and they all felt it. The jungle began to hum with a different kind of tension. As the team followed Ranger toward the sound of rushing water, the trees grew taller here, their canopies thicker, making the daylight fade into an eerie green gloom. Roots twisted across the ground like coils, and every few steps a branch snapped underfoot, drawing anxious glances. The river was near. They could hear it, but couldn't see it yet. Reyes crouched low, brushing aside a curtain of vines. We're close, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Ranger moved just ahead, nose low, tail stiff. His body spoke louder than words. Something was wrong. The air felt heavier, still, and then they saw it. A wide, slow-moving river stretched out before them, brown with mud and silt, cutting through the jungle like a silent barrier. The far side was hidden behind thick trees and brush. There were no sounds, no birds, no insects, not even the usual wind in the leaves, just the river and its sluggish flow. The team fanned out, crouching near the edge, eyes scanning for anything out of place. Too quiet, murmured Corporal Lewis, his gaze locked on the far bank. Reyes was about to speak when Ranger suddenly froze. Ears up, body stiff, eyes fixed on the trees across the water. That's when it started. The first shot cracked through the air, tearing through the vines overhead. A heartbeat later, the jungle exploded with sound. Bullets snapped through branches and leaves, peppering the ground around them. The men dove for cover behind rocks, logs, anything they could find. The riverbank became a storm of flying dirt and shredded foliage. Stay low, Reyes shouted, pressing his back to a fallen tree as leaves rained down around him. Ranger stayed close, not flinching, only shifting to Reyes's side, as if sensing the safest angle. More gunfire erupted from the far side of the river. The attackers weren't many, but they were hidden well. Their shots came quick and sharp, like they were trying to trap the team in place. Graves took a position behind a twisted root and fired back. Anderson and Hale followed, careful and precise. Lewis covered the left flank, eyes scanning the trees beyond. Reyes didn't fire. He watched Ranger. The dog's nose twitched. His body shifted slightly. Then he looked back at Reyes and flicked his head to the right. A signal. Reyes nodded. He sees something, he said to Lewis. A way out. Without waiting, Reyes grabbed Ranger's collar and followed his lead. They crawled sideways through thick brush, circling away from the main team, and toward a narrow dip in the riverbank. Ranger stopped, suddenly, lowered his head, and let out a soft huff. Reyes froze. Directly across from them, half hidden in shadows, was a small rise of ground, too smooth to be natural. Eyes narrowed. Reyes studied it. It wasn't just ground. It was cover dug into the earth, camouflaged with leaves. Another group lay in wait, ready to strike if the team tried to cross too early. Ambush, Reyes whispered. He pulled back and returned to the others, guiding them to the safer side. Thanks to Ranger's warning, they shifted positions quietly. carefully. Gunfire still cracked through the air, but now they had a better angle. Hail tossed a rock high into the brush across the river, and as expected, the hidden attackers gave away their position with return fire. And that's when Lewis, crouched behind a moss-covered log, spotted the gap. "There," he pointed. "We can cross behind that fallen tree. They won't see us from the blind spot." Reyes nodded, then looked to Ranger. The dog had already moved, paws silent on the damp earth, leading the way. One by one they followed, staying low, barely making a sound. The fallen tree stretched halfway across the river, mossy and slick. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Ranger crossed first, tail low, and steps precise. The men followed, balancing carefully, weapons raised, every movement calculated. Just as the last man reached the other side, a final burst of gunfire rang out, but it was misdirected. The ambushers were still aiming at the original bank. Reyes motioned them to hold, then silence again. No more shots, no rustling, just the river, moving slow. They waited a moment longer, listening. Nothing. Ranger stepped forward, sniffing the ground near a cluster of thorn bushes. He paused, nose pressing into a low branch. Reyes joined him, brushing aside a sharp twig. And there it was, a torn strip of cloth, tangled on the thorns, faded green, just like the piece they found before. This one had stitching near the edge, a threadbare pocket seam, the kind found on the front of a uniform. Reyes's heart pounded. Jack. It hadn't been there long. The cloth was damp but not soaked. The edges were fresh, as if caught only recently. Ranger sniffed it and let out a low, steady growl, not of danger but confirmation. Hope sparked. "Jack's still ahead," Reyes said, looking at the others. "He's close." Anderson glanced at the river behind them. "They were trying to buy time, not stop us, delay us." "Then we can't waste another minute," Reyes said. But before they could move, Ranger raised his head again. He stood perfectly still, ears up, staring into the trees ahead. Something was out there. The jungle had gone quiet again, not peaceful, but waiting. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply watched. Reyes whispered, "We're not alone." They knew now. This wasn't just a chase. It was a game. The enemy wasn't running. They were guiding, drawing them deeper. Toward what? No one could say yet. But with Ranger leading and Jack's signs growing stronger, they weren't backing down. They crossed into the trees once more, the torn cloth held tightly in Reyes's hand, hope hanging in the air like mist. The jungle was far from done with them, and neither was whoever had taken Jack. The sun had dipped low behind the jungle canopy, casting long shadows that twisted and crawled across the uneven floor. The deeper the team moved, the thicker the silence became. Bird calls had vanished. The wind barely stirred. Even the insects, usually relentless in this part of Vietnam, had quieted. The only sound was the rustling of boots on leaves and Ranger's steady breathing as he led the way. Reyes glanced at the map again, though it was hardly useful now. This area wasn't marked, which meant the enemy wanted it that way, hidden and forgotten. "Where is he taking us?" Anderson murmured, wiping sweat from his brow. Reyes didn't answer. He just kept walking, trusting Ranger's instincts. The dog had never led them wrong before, and now, Ranger's movements were more intense. Head low, tail sharp, nose moving in quick bursts, like he was picking up something layered, something recent. They came to a clearing choked with weeds and overgrowth. In the center stood the skeleton of what used to be a campsite, rusted cooking pots, charred remains of a fire pit, and broken bamboo poles still stuck in the ground. The place hadn't been used in weeks, maybe months, yet something felt off. Ranger halted and growled softly. The team fanned out, sweeping the edges. Anderson checked the collapsed lean-to. Hale poked through a pile of ash with a stick, revealing nothing but soggy charcoal. Lewis kicked over a woven mat lying in the dirt, and that's when he saw it. "Hey, over here," he called. Reyes moved quickly to his side. Lewis had crouched beside the mat, now flipped over. Nestled in a shallow dent in the ground was a small object, half buried in dirt. Reyes knelt down and carefully brushed it off. It was an old lighter, American-made. The casing was scratched and dented from time and use, but the top still flicked open with a familiar click. Etched into the side were 3 letters. T. Reyes felt his stomach twist. He stared at the initials like they were ghosts. He hadn't seen that lighter in over 3 months. "T.H. Anderson said. "That's Helly, isn't it?" Reyes nodded slowly, still holding the lighter in his palm like it might burn him. "Corporal Tom Halley," he muttered. "That was his." Lewis stepped back, confused. "But Halley, he went missing months ago. They said he never came back from that patrol up north." "He didn't," Reyes replied, standing up. "He was listed as missing. No sign of him. We figured the worst." The team looked around the abandoned camp, suddenly seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't just an enemy hideout. This place had a story, one that hadn't ended yet. "Could he have survived?" Hale asked. "Maybe he escaped, tried to find help." Reyes didn't answer. He turned the lighter over in his hand again. Halley had carved those initials himself, late one night in the barracks, joking about making it easier to return lost items. Reyes remembered it clearly. Halley had been quiet, but sharp, always watching, always listening. He and Jack Latner had been close back then, like brothers. And now, here was his lighter, buried in a Viet Cong camp, under a mat meant to hide it. "Maybe someone took it off him," Lewis offered. "Could be the enemy found his body and kept it as a trophy." "Maybe," Reyes said, though his voice didn't sound convinced. But then he noticed something else. The mat it was hidden under wasn't thrown carelessly. It was carefully placed, as if someone wanted to come back for the lighter, but not let anyone else find it. The thought was unsettling. Anderson looked over. "You think Halley's alive?" "If he is," Reyes said, "we have to ask why he's here, and how he's involved." A heavy silence fell over the group. They had started this mission with one goal: find Jack and bring him home. But now the lines were blurring. If Halley was alive, what had he been doing all this time? Why was his lighter in a camp that looked more friendly to the enemy than to Americans? And more importantly, was he part of Jack's disappearance? The team gathered closer, the jungle pressing in around them like a wall. Lewis broke the silence. "This changes things, doesn't it?" Reyes nodded. "It might not be just a rescue anymore. Could be a trap," Hale said. "Or worse," Anderson added, voice tight. "Maybe Jack walked into something bigger than we understood." They were tired, covered in sweat, nerves fraying, but now doubt crept in like a shadow they couldn't shake. If Halley had turned, if he had joined the other side, it meant someone who once shared meals, jokes, and late-night patrols with them had crossed over, and he might have taken Jack with him. Reyes looked down at Ranger. The dog was watching him, still alert, still ready. "We keep going," Reyes said. "Ranger's still got the trail. Jack's still out there. Until we know the truth, we don't turn back." But even as he said it, a weight settled on his chest. This wasn't the mission they started. Somewhere ahead in the trees was an answer. Maybe Jack, maybe Halley, maybe both. But now, each step forward carried something heavier. The jungle no longer just hid enemies. It might be hiding betrayal. Reyes slid the lighter into his pocket, the metal still warm from his grip. "Let's move," he said, voice steady. But as they slipped back into the trees, no one spoke. The leaves rustled overhead, but the air felt colder. The ground beneath their boots, more uncertain. The jungle had changed, and now, so had the mission. And none of them could shake the thought. If Halley was alive, whose side was he on? The sky above the jungle had turned a sickly gray by the time Ranger froze in place at the edge of a moss-covered slope. His nose twitched, his ears tilted forward. One paw lifted, holding steady mid-air, as if he was pointing to something invisible. Reyes noticed it right away. He lowered himself slowly, brushing aside vines and thick ferns. At first it looked like nothing more than a natural depression in the ground, just a hollow dip swallowed by roots and time. But then Ranger let out a low, urgent growl, deep in his throat. Reyes reached forward and pushed away the debris. That's when he saw it. A wooden hatch, half buried, covered in years of damp soil, camouflaged perfectly. "Get over here," Reyes called quietly. Anderson and Lewis joined him, brushing away the rest of the cover. The old bamboo frame creaked as they opened it, revealing a narrow hole descending into darkness. It was just wide enough for a man to crawl through. "Looks like an old supply tunnel," Anderson said, his voice hushed. "Or something worse," Reyes replied. The air that rose from the hole was thick and wet. It smelled like mold and rust. Ranger was already sniffing around the edge, tail stiff, body low. He looked back at Reyes and let out a single breath, short, confident. Reyes clicked on his flashlight, but even the beam was swallowed by the tunnel. The walls inside were made of packed dirt, reinforced with rotting timber. The silence was so complete, it almost made their own breathing sound loud. One at a time, Ray said, quiet and steady. Watch your steps. Let Ranger lead. Ranger dropped into the tunnel first, tail brushing the low ceiling. Reyes followed right behind, ducking low, his head nearly scraping the top. The others moved in after, crawling carefully into the tunnel's throat. Inside, the world changed. The light from above disappeared almost instantly. The walls closed in. The only sound was the soft scuff of knees and boots on the damp earth. The air was heavy, thick, with moisture and a faint sour smell that clung to the skin. Somewhere above them, jungle sounds filtered faintly through the earth, distant and muffled, but down here, it was just the steady rhythm of Ranger's paws and their own nervous breath. For nearly half an hour they crawled in silence. The tunnel curved and branched, occasionally opening into wider chambers reinforced with wooden beams. The deeper they went, the clearer it became. This was no abandoned tunnel. Someone had used it recently. Reyes ran his hand along the wall. It was warm, strangely warm, as if body heat still lingered. Then, Ranger paused again, head turned sharply toward a side passage. He sniffed hard at the dirt floor and gave another low growl. "What's he got?" Lewis asked, pausing behind him. Reyes moved ahead. At the mouth of the side tunnel, Ranger had his nose buried in a pile of scattered debris. Among the dirt and old gear sat something small, a silver food wrapper. It crinkled slightly when Reyes picked it up. The label was unmistakably American. He turned it over and stared. Peanut butter crackers. The same kind handed out in ration kits. Recently opened, still fresh enough to have a faint smell. Next to it, a plastic spoon and a crumpled napkin. Signs of someone eating here, not long ago. "There's more," Hale whispered, shining his light ahead. Just a few feet beyond the wrapper, wedged between a stone and a timber beam, was a frayed cloth strap. Reyes pulled it free. His breath caught. A name was faintly inked across the inside, barely visible but still there. Jack Latner. Reyes didn't say anything right away. He just stared at the strap in his hands. The fraying along the edges looked fresh. Someone had been wearing it, and not long ago. The team gathered around silently. Their eyes met, sharing the same thought. Jack had been here. Maybe he still was. Ranger stood still, nose pressed to the floor again, his body tense. And then, from far off in the tunnel, came the faintest echo, muffled voices, unfamiliar, distant, bouncing through the walls. It was impossible to make out words, but the tone was clear. Movement, conversation. They weren't alone. Reyes held up a hand. They stayed frozen in place, barely breathing. The voices faded, swallowed back into the earth. But the warning was clear. There were people in this tunnel, and not on their side. Reyes nodded toward Ranger, and the dog continued forward slowly, silently. Every so often, he would pause, ears up, listening. He knew this tunnel told a story, one only he could hear. They passed through another chamber, this one with low benches carved into the walls and old blankets tossed carelessly into a corner. Someone had rested here. Maybe Jack, maybe not. And then something new. The wall smeared with chalk marks, lines and symbols Reyes didn't recognize. One, though, stood out. A single name scratched faintly in English. Hallie. Reyes stared at it. Was it a message, a warning, a sign? Anderson stepped beside him. "Looks like someone wanted us to find this." Reyes felt a deep unease grow in his chest. They were chasing a trail. Yes, but now, it felt like someone was leading them on it. They pressed deeper until the tunnel began to slope upward again. Ranger moved faster now, more urgent. The air grew warmer, fresher. Somewhere ahead the tunnel led out. But before they reached the next turn, Ranger stopped again, his body suddenly stiff. He gave a quiet whine, not fear but something close to sorrow. Reyes moved beside him and knelt. There, half buried in the dirt, was a small wooden token, hand-carved, worn smooth by fingers. Reyes recognized it. Jack used to keep it on his belt loop, a charm his sister had sent him, a piece of home. Reyes picked it up gently. He could feel the weight of it, not just wood, but memory, presence. Jack had dropped it here, on purpose maybe. A sign, a breadcrumb in the dark. Ray stood and looked ahead, into the final stretch of the tunnel. "He's close," he whispered. "I can feel it." But as they moved forward, every step brought more questions. Jack had been here. Hallie had been here. The tunnel wasn't just a path, it was a maze filled with decisions, alliances, and secrets. And somewhere ahead, those secrets waited. The tunnel ended beneath a curtain of hanging roots and moss. Reyes parted them gently, his hand meeting fresh air and light. For a moment the world beyond felt unreal, too open, too bright after the suffocating dark. One by one the team emerged, crouched low, dirt-covered, blinking against the filtered jungle light that broke through the thick canopy above. They were in a clearing, remote and perfectly tucked into the folds of the jungle. From the outside, it looked untouched, peaceful, even. But barely 20 yards ahead, the illusion vanished. Past a thin wall of undergrowth they spotted it, an enemy camp, quiet, guarded and hidden like a buried thorn. Bamboo huts sat low against the ground, camouflaged with leafy branches. A single cooking fire sent thin smoke into the trees. It wasn't large, maybe a dozen figures moving slowly between tents, unaware of the eyes now watching them. Reyes held up a fist and dropped flat. The team followed. Ranger just beside him froze like stone, eyes fixed ahead, body taut. Reyes lifted his binoculars, scanning the camp carefully. That's when he saw him. Jack. He was tied to a post near the edge of the clearing, ankles bound, wrists secured above his head. His uniform was torn, face worn with exhaustion, but he was alive. His head hung low, lips moving, murmuring something. A guard walked past him, tossing him a water can. Jack didn't react. Reyes felt a quiet surge of hope, but it was quickly drowned. Another figure stepped into view, taller, familiar. Tom Halley. Reyes blinked, stunned. There was no mistaking him. He looked leaner, rougher than before, his hair longer, his clothes a mix of American fabric and local patterns. But the face, it was unmistakable. Halley was alive, and he wasn't a prisoner. He barked orders to the guards, his posture confident, steps firm. They listened. They obeyed. He wasn't just surviving, he was commanding. Reyes' grip on the binoculars tightened. How was that possible? Anderson whispered behind him. We thought he was gone. Reyes didn't respond at first. His mind was already chasing memories, ones he hadn't visited in a long time. Flashback. Months earlier. It had been a rainy morning the last time they saw Halley. The unit had been pinned down in a jungle gully, movement nearly impossible. Halley had been the last man out, wounded during the retreat. There had been no time, no way to get back for him. By the time they regrouped, the area was crawling with patrol. They searched for days, found nothing. They had held on to hope, until command listed him as missing. But now, watching him move freely among the enemy, Reyes realized something chilling. Halley hadn't just survived, he had chosen to stay. Back in the present, Reyes kept his eyes on him. Halley knelt beside Jack, speaking softly. Jack shook his head. Halley's face twisted, not with anger, but with something worse, disappointment. He stood and walked away. Reyes pulled back slowly, crawling behind a thick trunk where the others waited. That's him, Reyes said. That's Halley. No way, Hale whispered. He was one of us. He was, Reyes said, but not anymore. The team sat in tense silence. The clearing ahead looked quiet, but they all knew appearances meant nothing out here. We can't go in guns blazing, Anderson said. Too many guards, too open. There's another option, Reyes said quietly, his eyes distant. We draw them out, one by one. Let the noise come from somewhere else. We move in during the distraction. And if it goes south? Hale asked. Then we adapt. But Jack's right there, Reyes said. We don't wait. Ranger suddenly shifted. His ears twitched. He looked up at Reyes and let out a low, muffled whine, the kind he only made when something didn't sit right. Reyes placed a hand on his back. He understood. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. There was betrayal here, something deeper than strategy or survival. Halley knew them. He knew their patterns. If he saw them coming, he'd be ready. And still something gnawed at Reyes. He couldn't shake the image of Halley kneeling beside Jack. Not angry, not cruel, but conflicted. That wasn't the look of a man fully gone. It was the look of someone standing in a place he didn't recognize anymore. Flashback. Earlier in the war, Halley had always been the first to speak up for his team. Sharp-witted, loyal, he carried photos of his little brother folded in his helmet, wrote letters home every Sunday without fail. But Reyes remembered the last days before he vanished. How quiet Halley had become. The way he'd stare off into the trees after patrol, the tension in his jaw. He had started asking questions, big ones, about the war, about what it all meant. Reyes had brushed it off back then, told him to keep his head down and keep moving. Now, those questions had clearly led him somewhere else. Reyes pulled the team in closer. He drew a quick plan in the dirt. Nothing elaborate, just a rough outline of huts, guards, and approach paths. We go in under the tree line. Keep to the left. If we can reach that supply tent, we'll have enough cover to move on, Jack. And Hallie? Anderson asked. Reyes looked up, his voice even. He's not our mission. Jack is. They nodded. The plan was set. But as they prepared to move, Reyes took one last glance toward the clearing. Hallie was standing near the fire now, talking to one of the guards, his back to the trees. A question lingered in Reyes's mind, heavier than the pack on his shoulders. What breaks a man like that? Was it abandonment, fear, or something worse? Reyes didn't know. But soon he would have to face him. Not in anger, not in fury, but in something deeper. Recognition. And maybe in that moment he'd find out whether the man he once trusted was truly lost, or just hiding behind the wrong side of a broken line. The sky cracked open in a roar. Dark clouds rolled above the jungle, and rain began to fall in sheets, hammering leaves and turning the forest floor into a river of mud. Thunder rattled the canopy, masking all but the closest sounds. It was the kind of storm that erased shadows and for Sergeant Reyes and his team. It was the cover they had been waiting for. They moved like ghosts, low, quiet, and deliberate. Every step was a negotiation with the soaked earth. Every breath timed between the thunderclaps. Ranger led the way. Ears pinned back, nose barely skimming the ground. His body was tight with anticipation, yet his movements were fluid, natural. He wasn't following orders now, he was following instinct. Reyes stayed close behind him, hand resting lightly on the dog's back as they crept toward the edge of the clearing. The camp lay just ahead, its outlines blurred by rain and wind. The guards had taken shelter beneath the canopies and tents, their focus fractured by the storm. A gift brief and rare. They reached the brush line where they had watched Jack earlier. He was still there, slumped near the central post, barely conscious. But now, someone stood over him. Hallie. No more shadows, no more doubt. He was fully visible, a dark silhouette in the storm. His jacket clung to him like a second skin, soaked and heavy. In one hand he held something raised, something Reyes couldn't quite make out, through the curtain of rain. Ranger growled, a low, quiet sound. It wasn't anger, it was warning. Reyes adjusted his grip on the strap of his pack. The team behind him crouched low, weapons ready, eyes locked. Time felt suspended. Every heartbeat was louder than the thunder. Then Hallie moved. He stepped toward Jack and raised his hand higher. Reyes's breath caught. In an instant, before anyone could whisper a command, Ranger bolted. He exploded from the brush, a silent blur across the clearing. The team froze, stunned, as the dog crossed open ground with impossible speed. Hallie barely had time to react. Ranger struck him squarely in the chest, knocking him back and sending the object in his hand skittering into the mud. Reyes charged. The others followed. Ranger was already on top of Hallie, teeth bared but not striking, simply pinning him. Hallie struggled, trying to push the dog off, but Ranger didn't move, his body a wall of muscle and fury held just in check. Reyes reached them and pulled Ranger back, shouting Hallie's name through the storm. The man stopped struggling. His eyes met Reyes's, and for a second, everything went still. There was no hatred in Hallie's face, no anger, just a heavy, hollow expression, like a man who'd walked too far down a road he no longer recognized. "You left me," Hallie said quietly. "We tried to come back," Reyes answered, his voice low but steady. "We searched for you for days." Hallie shook his head slowly. "They didn't." Reyes didn't argue. There wasn't time, and there weren't enough words. He motioned for Hale and Anderson to secure Hallie gently. No force, just enough to keep him from running. Ranger had already returned to Jack's side, whining softly and licking at his arm. Jack stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Ranger," he murmured. Reyes reached him and cut the cords binding his wrists. "We've got you, Jack. We're getting you out of here." But even as he said it, voices rang out from the far side of the camp, shouts in the rain, lights flickering, silhouettes moving between the trees. Reinforcements. The team tensed. They didn't have time for a firefight. Reyes scanned the perimeter, thinking fast. Ranger let out a sharp bark and darted toward the far edge of the clearing, disappearing into the underbrush. Reyes hesitated. Then he understood. "Follow him," he barked. "Now." They moved fast. Jack supported between two men, Hallie silently marching ahead, under Anderson's watch. The team plunged into the jungle, following Ranger's lead. The dog ran with purpose, veering off the known trail and into a narrow path barely wide enough for a man. Roots curled like fingers from the ground, vines slapped at their faces. The storm helped them now, mud swallowing their tracks, wind erasing their sounds. Reyes kept his eyes on Ranger's tail, barely visible ahead, flicking left and right like a metronome. The path was unfamiliar, untouched by human feet. It twisted through dense foliage, dipped through a dry creek bed, then rose again through a cluster of moss-covered trees. Behind them, the camp faded. Shouts grew distant, then vanished. Minutes passed, maybe more. Eventually, Ranger slowed. He led them to a hollow at the base of a large tree, its roots forming a natural cave. Reyes signaled for them to stop, catch their breath, and listen. Nothing. Only the storm and the sound of their own lungs. They were safe for now. Reyes knelt beside Ranger and pressed his forehead gently to the dog's. "You did good, boy. Real good." Ranger licked his cheek, tail wagging despite the exhaustion. Jack was awake now, sipping water from a canteen, eyes still unfocused but alert. He looked around at the faces, his rescuers, and then locked eyes with Hallie. Hallie didn't speak. He just sat quietly, staring at the floor, hands resting on his knees. Reyes walked over to him. "We'll bring you back," he said simply. Hallie nodded. "I'll answer for what I did. But his voice cracked. "I wanted to be seen, not forgotten." Reyes didn't reply. He didn't need to. Outside, the storm began to ease, the rain shifting from a downpour to a soft patter. Dawn wasn't far. They would move again soon, back toward friendly ground, toward debriefings, explanations, and uncertain futures. But for now, for just a moment, they were still. A missing soldier was found. A bond between man and dog had once again defied the impossible. And deep in the jungle, beneath thunder and shadow, a quiet redemption had begun to unfold. The jungle wasn't letting go. It gripped their legs with tangled roots, soaked their uniforms with every low branch and hanging vine, and swallowed sound like a sponge. Every step forward came at a price, and the only path out was the one Ranger carved for them, one cautious paw at a time. Jack leaned heavily on Reyes and Hale, his steps slow and uncertain. His face was pale, his voice quiet whenever he spoke, but his eyes had begun to clear. He was aware of how close everything had come to slipping away. Reyes glanced down at Ranger, who was staying just ahead of them, trotting wearily with his tongue hanging out. The dog's coat was matted with rain and grime, his legs trembling slightly with fatigue, but he never stopped, not even once. And none of them questioned him, not after everything. They climbed over slick rocks and navigated muddy gullies, moving toward a point Reyes had marked earlier, an old clearing used years ago for resupply drops. If the storm had lifted enough, they could get a message through. If not, they'd have to hold out and hope. Either way, this was their shot. As they reached the final ridge, the jungle suddenly parted ahead like a curtain drawn back. There it was, the clearing, a wide, flat space surrounded by towering trees. The canopy above just open enough to let in the dull morning light. It looked untouched, almost peaceful. But Reyes knew better. He scanned the trade line and signaled for the others to hold position. Then he pulled out the flare from his pack. It was their only one, and the storm had soaked everything. He prayed the casing had held. With one flick of his wrist, the flare hissed to life, shooting a red streak high above the clearing. It burst just beneath the low-hanging clouds, casting a warm glow over the forest. Minutes passed like hours. Then came the faint, rhythmic thumping, just barely audible beneath the wind. A helicopter. They weren't out yet, but hope surged through the group like fire, until the crack of branches behind them snapped the moment in two. Enemy voices, movement, fast and closing in. Reyes spun, raising his hand to signal. "Get Jack to the clearing," he barked. "We hold them here." Anderson and Hale nodded, pulling Jack between them and rushing across the open ground toward the landing zone. The rest of the team dropped behind tree trunks and under thick brush, waiting. "Listen." The patrol moved fast, just as the chopper came into view. It roared over the treetops, blades whipping the air, and began its descent. Then the firefight broke out. Bullets tore through foliage. The jungle erupted in noise and flashes. Reyes and his team returned fire in controlled bursts, not to overwhelm but to hold, to buy time. In the chaos, Ranger moved on instinct. He darted back and forth between positions, helping spot movement in the underbrush, alerting Reyes with a low growl just before an attacker flanked right. Reyes turned and fired a quick shot that sent the man scrambling back. The chopper's skids touched down. Anderson waved from the clearing. "Move!" Reyes shouted for everyone to pull back. One by one, the team fell back to the extraction point, laying down covering fire as they moved. Ranger was last, still pacing, still watching. As Reyes climbed aboard, he turned and called the dog's name. "Ranger, let's go." For a second, Ranger hesitated, eyes locked on the shadows at the edge of the jungle. Then he turned and ran, bounding up into the helicopter just as it lifted off. The chopper rose into the air, tilting away from the clearing. The jungle fell beneath them, fading into a vast sea of green. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the rotor's hum and the gasps of tired breathing. Jack sat slumped against the wall, eyes closed. His fingers rested lightly on Ranger's back. The dog curled beside him, chest rising and falling with slow, exhausted rhythm. And then, Jack spoke. "Hallie gave them everything," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. "He wasn't just trying to disappear. He told them about the supply lines, where we moved, when. He knew the old patrol routes. They used it all." The words settled over the team like a weight. Reyes clenched his jaw. "That's how they stayed ahead of us," he muttered. "That's how they knew where to wait." Jack nodded. "They trusted him. They gave him food, rest. He called it survival. Said he was left behind, that no one came. I don't think he ever stopped being angry." Nobody spoke for a moment. Anderson looked over at Reyes. "So what now?" Reyes leaned back, eyes on the horizon. "Now we bring him in. Let the ones above us figure out what to do. We've done our part." Jack turned his gaze to Ranger, a faint smile forming on his face. "I wouldn't be here without him." Ranger's eyes opened for just a moment as if he understood, then they drifted shut again. Reyes looked around the cabin, his men bruised, silent and steady, and the dog, whose strength had carried them all through the jungle, who had braved every trap and storm without question. "You're wrong, Jack," Reyes said softly. "We wouldn't be here without him." It wasn't just loyalty, it was something deeper. Ranger hadn't been following orders, he'd been protecting his pack. He had sensed what they hadn't. He had trusted the trail, even when the signs were mixed. He had made decisions in silence, in instinct, and in the end, it had saved them all. The chopper banked slightly, rising toward the clouds. Below, the jungle grew smaller, swallowed once again by mist and shadow. Whatever came next, reports, investigations, the hard questions about betrayal and survival, would wait. For now, they had escaped. For now, they had each other. And for now, Ranger slept, finally, deeply beside the man he had never given up on. If you're a proud American who honors the courage and sacrifice of our war heroes, hit that subscribe button. Join us for more powerful true stories that keep their legacy alive, one mission at a time.